thanks again for coming. My name's Martin, up there on the slide, and I work for a company called the Bluetooth Special Interest Group, who, if you're not familiar with us, you've not heard of us maybe, are a technical standards organisation, obviously behind Bluetooth technology and how it works. So we don't make things, we're not a manufacturer, we're not the company that makes all the Bluetooth, and have it in a warehouse and it gets delivered by trucks to other companies. It's all about specifications, and the rationale behind the specifications that our work delivers is interoperability. In other words, all manufacturers implement Bluetooth in their products from the same set of technical specs, so they should all just work together seamlessly out of the box. And generally that is the case. That number maybe helps prove the point. I mean, Bluetooth is almost 20 years old. Well, it's actually 20 years old now officially. Round about now, 10 million devices ship every single day that have Bluetooth in them. That number's actually old. It's probably a year old, so I'm probably wrong to say that. And year in, year out, the annual figures just keep growing. We don't see any sign of it particularly flattening. And doubtless there are many reasons for that, but I think one of the primary kind of ingredients in that continued adoption in all sorts of products and applications is the way it's evolved. So thanks to the people who work behind the scenes on Bluetooth technology from all sorts of companies, the technology has evolved quite carefully and systematically over the years. In the beginning, it was really a cable replacement technology, so two devices that perhaps previously would have had a cable linking them. You throw the cable away and you communicate wirelessly, and that was really the original idea behind Bluetooth. But if we wind forwards to 2010, this new flavor of Bluetooth called Bluetooth Low Energy was released, and Bluetooth Low Energy is very power efficient. Devices can communicate but run off small batteries for years, or possibly using energy harvesting techniques such as ambient light inside buildings, don't need batteries at all because it's so power efficient. Wind forward, say, to 2016 when Bluetooth 5 was released. That doubled the transmission rates, quadrupled the range. I tend to like to ask people what they think the range is, but I'll skip that and I'll just tell you. It's well over 1 kilometre now. I was at an event in Paris earlier this year, and there was a company who make Bluetooth stuff presenting, and they talked about how they'd achieved 3 kilometres in good line of sight conditions, but 3 kilometres. This is not the technology of 20 years ago where maybe 10 metres was the norm, and we talked about personal area networks and stuff. We don't talk about those things anymore at all, so it's really changed. Moving on, 2017 saw something called Bluetooth Mesh released, entirely different way of using Bluetooth. So now instead of small numbers of devices communicating around a kind of hub-spoke topology, now it's mesh networking, and it's tens of thousands of smart devices, maybe in a smart building, all able to form a network securely and communicate for all sorts of purposes, automation being one of them. So Bluetooth Mesh, big stepping stone, big milestone for Bluetooth in its evolution. Brings us up to the present day, or in fact year, because earlier this year we released Bluetooth 5.1, or to be specific, we released the specification for Bluetooth 5.1 from which manufacturers can now work. And there are a number of things on the slide there that it delivered, but the key one is called direction finding, which is one of the things I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to kind of spend most of my time focusing on that pretty cool new capability that Bluetooth has. So to set the scene, by the way, you late arrivals, welcome, thank you so much for coming. Everyone else here is feeling very smug because they got a sticker and you didn't, okay? But I was saying my primary responsibility at Bluetooth is sticker distribution, so if you want one, come get one before the end, and I'll send you home deliriously happy with your free gift, or not. So, to resume, let's just set the scene before we get into the new stuff by talking about Bluetooth and location services. So location services, location-based services, has been around for years. I was doing mobile technology stuff, 20 odd years ago, and I'd go to conferences, and people were talking about location-based services back then. And it was quite a new thing then, the idea that you could trigger kind of contextual actions, behaviors, and so on, based on location in various guises. So Bluetooth has had location-related capabilities for a long time, actually, for a good few years. Think of these that I'm going to come on to show you in the next slide as kind of generation one, and then we'll kind of look at what the state of the art is today. But we have a way of classifying the different types of application that you might use Bluetooth for under the heading of location services. So proximity solutions, that's obviously all about being near to stuff, maybe stuff that you've lost. So item finding is one of the use cases. You know, I've lost my keys. Where are they? Oh, they're here. That kind of thing, thanks to an app on my phone. Point of interest solutions, this is where proximity with a thing of interest, maybe it's the doorway into a store, maybe it's a room in an art gallery, that alone is sufficient to trigger something, usually the provision of information to the user. And then on the other half of the slide, we've got positioning systems, which is really about tracking things, so real-time tracking, which is about asset management and stuff like that. And indoor positioning really is about indoor navigation, okay? So those are the sort of four pillars as we see them regarding Bluetooth and location services. So the stuff that we already had prior to 2019 and the new 5.1 capabilities are summarized here. So profile, that's a term we use in the world of Bluetooth for a specification that defines the rules for using Bluetooth in a particular way for a certain type of product or use case. So we already had the proximity profile and the find me profile. That's the one you use to find your keys when you've lost them. And on the other side, the indoor positioning profile has been around for a good few years as well. It's going to get a bit of a refresh soon. In the middle, though, is the one that people tend to have heard of. I mean, who here has heard of the Bluetooth beacon? Okay, that's 47%. Perhaps, something like that anyway. So kind of roughly half of you have heard of Bluetooth beacons. So beacons are a really simple idea. They weren't invented by us, actually. I think Apple can be credited with the first Bluetooth beacon. Specifically, they talk about iBeacon. That's the way they branded it. And the Bluetooth beacon is just a transmitter, a Bluetooth transmitter that broadcasts a message, broadcast meaning not talking to one device directly in a connection. Now we're just broadcasting. And any other Bluetooth receiver, maybe your phone, typically your phone, can receive that broadcast information. And the information will contain usually a unique ID, and an app on your phone will translate that unique ID to some information, such as, if the user's receiving beacon 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, longer number than that, they must be in this room, or they must be near to this object. So beacons are deployed all over the place. There are 2,000 in Gatwick Airport in London, one of the airports I use from time to time, for example, that provide information services to passengers as they pass through the airport, and they're in all sorts of scenarios. So quietly, Bluetooth beacons have been a really successful kind of location-oriented use of Bluetooth. But current technology, or rather that previous generation of technology, doesn't provide you with the ability to figure out the direction a transmitted signal is coming from. You just know you're in range. So if I'm stood here and I'm in range of some beacon, all I know is that it's somewhere around me. There's a 360-degree set of possibilities as to where that beacon is placed. I can estimate my distance from it, but it's not particularly accurate. You know, maybe I'm going to do a calculation. It's called a path loss calculation. It's based on signal strength and some reference numbers. And I'm going to figure out that I'm somewhere between 2 and 5, 2 and 6 meters from a thing that's somewhere around me. So for some requirements, this is absolutely fine. All I need to know is that you're near the thing. Therefore, you're in this part of a store. But for other use cases, that's not good enough. You need far greater accuracy. And if only we were able to determine the direction the signal was coming from, the picture changes to that. So now we have a much better idea of where the person is standing, holding their phone, receiving that Bluetooth signal. I'm being stalked from behind now. It's very disconcerting. No one told me, but it's fine. Item finding suffers from some similar constraints. When I was a kid, I hope it wasn't just me that did this. Maybe some of you can reassure me and tell me that you did it too, but we'd play a game. I'm talking when I was this big, all right, not last week, where one of your friends would hide something in the room, and or family or what have you, you'd have to try and find it. And if you walked in the right direction, closer to the object, they say you're getting warmer. If you're walking away from it, they say you're getting colder. So bit by bit, you'd figure out, oh, it's here. Okay, so we used to play this game. Anyone else? Just me? Oh, God, thank you. I thought I'd confessed way too much there. And with item finding kind of generation 1, it's like that. You know, you have an app on a phone, somewhere in the room there's a thing that's transmitting some information to you, but you don't know where it is. You just know it's nearby somewhere, so you kind of walk towards it and away from it. Some kind of indicator on the screen tells you when you're getting nearer or further away, and eventually you find your keys. But obviously, if we know the direction of the signal, the user experience can be completely different, and on the whole, considerably better. Over and above making existing use cases better, there are new things that become possible when we know the direction a signal is being transmitted from. So we have one we call directional discovery. This is where I point my phone in a certain direction, and I get information about the things I'm pointing at. So rather than being told there are some Picassos in this room of the art gallery, I can point at one specific painting over there on that wall, and I'll be told exactly what I'm looking at. Far more interesting. So, direction finding is here. So 5.1 released this exciting new capability. I'm going to tell you a little bit about what it is and what it can do. I'm also going to have a go at explaining how it works, which should be interesting or not, depending on your perspective. We'll see how that goes. But let's start with some statements about how this thing, kind of how it appears, what it looks like, what it can do. So it comes in two forms. You can use this in two different ways. One is called angle of arrival. Now, in the angle of arrival approach, the architecture looks like this. You have a transmitter, which is transmitting a special signal called a direction finding signal. Come back to that later on, tell you a bit more about what that really is. And receiver devices have more than one antenna. They have an antenna array, a collection of antenna with very known characteristics. And it's the angle of the arrival of that signal incident on each of those antenna in the antenna array that drives some calculations from which the angle of the signal is determined, okay? Quite accurately as well. We'll come on to accuracy as a kind of topic soon. And the other way of doing it is angle of departure. So kind of things are inverted. So now the transmitter has the antenna array. It's transmitting special direction finding signals one at a time from each of its antennae in some order, some sequence, and the receiver is able to do some calculations based on what it's receiving, again to figure out the angle that the signals were transmitted from as they left the transmitting device. So angle of arrival, angle of departure, the two different ways of using it. So angle of departure we anticipate being used for the indoor navigation, indoor positioning scenarios, because of course that means you can deploy what are effectively generation 2 beacons around the airport. They've now got an antenna array in them. But smartphones with an application that helps you find your way through the airport or another large building, they don't need special hardware, okay? All the kind of hardware sophistication will be in the transmitting device in that scenario. So let's talk about accuracy briefly. So obviously you saw generation 1, we don't know where the transmitter actually is. We're very limited as to our ability to say that you or some object is here. Okay, we just know that we're somewhere near to a transmitting device. But with the new direction finding capability, it's possible to get within a kind of 10 centimeter accuracy if the conditions are optimal. Okay, it's going to vary depending on conditions. But the way you're going to get the best possible accuracy works like this. Now imagine we're in a room, which we are by coincidence, and somewhere on the ceiling there's a location finding, a direction finding beacon which is transmitting a special signal. Now, my code and the device that's receiving that signal can figure out two angles. It can figure out an angle relative to a horizontal plane, so in this direction, so it's like, okay, it's over there somewhere, but also bearing in mind that the device that's transmitting with its antenna array of however many different antenna, I can also figure out an angle relative to a vertical plane. So it's over there and it's like this. So I end up with two lines that cross, and where those lines cross, that's pinpointing my position with some relative sort of calculations going on as well. So you can achieve some quite amazing results with this. There are companies who are using this technique with Bluetooth before the spec was published, so they were kind of involved in helping the spec progress, who are using this for doing things like tracking pucks in ice hockey games. Okay, it's really cool stuff. So, here's the fun bit for me, when I get to try and explain something that's actually, is it complicated or simple? I don't know. I'm going to try and explain how this works, because I'm guessing you're probably similar to me. I'm rarely satisfied with being told that something works in some kind of magical way and isn't it great and we should use it. I kind of want to know how things work. I'm not a cynic, but I do like to know how things work. It helps me believe, helps me do a good job when I start to try and exploit technologies for some purpose as well. Who here studied physics at school or university? Anyone? Any physicists in the room? Not many of you. Excellent. How many of you have seen the show Big Bang Theory? Yeah, exactly. So we all know about physics, right? We all learnt our physics from that show. And that's fine. Because we're going to go back in time to some really basic physics before we start looking at how this kind of technology or system works. And we start here with the observation that radio, Bluetooth is a radio communications technology, is itself an electromagnetic radiation which can be modelled or represented as either waves or particles. We all know that because we've heard Sheldon mention it many, many times. For our purposes, we're going to deal with waves, okay? Now, waves of any sort, whether it's waves in the sea or sound waves or radio waves, have various very fundamental properties, one of which is a wavelength. So waves repeat. You can see the way we have repeating patterns here, and that repeating segment is called a wave cycle. It has a beginning and it has an end. It kind of starts here, it goes to the top, drops down to the bottom, gets back to the middle again. That's a wave cycle. But the distance between the start and end, and it is a distance, it's a physical distance you can measure, that's the wavelength. Now for Bluetooth, it's about 12.5 centimeters. And you can calculate this stuff. It's quite easy to calculate using the speed of light. So that's wavelength. Beyond wavelength, we can also designate or measure the point we are at within a specific wave cycle, and that's called phase. So if you imagine a wave traveling across a fixed antenna, wherever that wave is intersecting that antenna at a given point in time, we call that the phase, and it's measured as an angle. So an entire wave cycle goes through 360 degrees or 2 pi radians of phase, okay, and that repeats for each wave cycle that passes over it. In our case, I'm showing radians here, so you can see a quarter of the way in, we're pi over 2 radians. Halfway through the wave cycle, the phase is pi radians, and so on. So you get the idea, that's phase. And because you saw on the previous slide, we can measure wavelength. Phase has a relationship with wavelength and therefore distance. Now, imagine we have a device which is acting as a transmitter, shown in the center of the screen there. And we have 2 antennae positioned on the circumference of a circle around that antenna. Now it's a circle, therefore, those 2 antennae must be exactly the same distance from the transmitter. Does anyone disagree? I might ask you to leave, but no one disagrees with that. It's basic geometry. Consequently, a signal transmitted by my transmitter, which will ripple outwards, received by my 2 antennae, if I'm measuring the phase at a given point in time, it will be identical because it's the same signal traveling from the same point in the center of that circle at the same speed with the same wavelength, the same frequency, and so on. So I must be seeing the same phase values at a given point in time, incident upon those 2 antennae as the waveform, the signal travels at the speed of light. Correct? Everyone happy so far? I'm going to say you are. That's good. But what happens, and this is where it gets useful, if I move one of my antennae a little bit, so it's not the same distance as the other one from the transmitter in the center. If I'm measuring the phase of the signal as it passes across my 2 antennae now at the same time, because one of them is a tiny bit nearer to the transmitter, I'm going to get different phase values because it's nearer, and you saw the relationship between wavelength and phase. Still with me? Still awake? Is this like, oh God, it's like being at school again? Anyone regretting? You've got a sticker. You've got a sticker out of this. Come on. It's well worth it. So if we look at this from the side, really it looks like this. So I've got 2 antennae again. They're slightly different distances from the transmitter, and therefore, if I'm measuring that phase value as the waveform passes across the 2 antennae at the same time, I'm going to get a different phase value. You can see it up there on the screen. In fact, I'm going to show you in a kind of animation later on if this is difficult to visualize, because I found this really hard to visualize myself when I first did it. But given different phase values, I can deduce from that different distances, and I end up with a triangle. And I know the length of two sides of the triangle. Who did trigonometry at school? Who remembers a tiny, tiny bit of maths, and not just from Big Bang Theory? Some of you, that's good enough for me, okay? So you know that trigonometry is all about angles and triangles and lengths of sides and that stuff, and it's actually quite simple mathematics. And this is how we arrive at our angle. We use trigonometry. That formula up there is straight from the Bluetooth core specification. It's one line of code, people, and from that we can deduce or calculate an angle of a signal incident upon two different antennae at a given point in time. And that's the essence of what's going on here. Now, I talked about taking measurements. Who's heard the phrase, I like asking questions of my audience, who's heard the phrase IQ sampling? Anybody? Ooh, excellent. Not a single person that I can see here. So this will be terribly thrilling for all of you to hear. So IQ sampling is a term that I think largely electrical engineers and people like that use. And it's a term for periodically, with some frequency, taking measurements of an analog signal. Because all this stuff is analog. We're talking about waves here. It's not digital at all at this stage. We're right at the bottom of the protocol stack. Nothing digital happening yet. So IQ sampling is that term. And the Bluetooth 5.1 stack allows you to switch on IQ sampling so that it takes those periodic measurements of signals arriving at one or more antenna. That's the technical term for it. Now, really hard to visualize this stuff, as I said. So in my own desperation to really get my head around what was actually going to be going on, this was before this was all released, I did have a go at writing a little animation, which I'm going to show you. And there it is. So, all JavaScript, by the way. Hope you're impressed by that. Yes, I still code. So what we've got going on here is the white thing in the middle, that's an antenna. Clearly, the yellow is the signal. Massively slowed down from the speed of light so we can see it traveling and passing across that antenna. The red blob, that's the phase being measured. The red number is it in degrees. So it's traveling from 0 to 360 degrees, up and down, up and down. That's the phase changing as the waveform, the signal passes across my single antenna. Now, if I had an antenna array, I'd have more than one antenna, of course. We'll limit ourselves to 3. Because of the distance between them that I've carefully chosen, we can see that I'm getting different phase values. You can see the red numbers just about, perhaps hard to see on the screen here in this light, but you can see the position of the red blobs at a given point in time is always different. If I'd chosen an exact multiple of the wavelength to space my antenna, I'd get the same value. So I've been careful to avoid that situation. So that's what's going on with the way phase is varying across my antenna. And if I switch on sampling here, what's happening now is that one at a time, according to some frequency, in my case it's every couple of seconds or something, in a Bluetooth system it's measured in microseconds, I'm taking a snapshot of the phase as measured at one of my antenna, and I'm saving that value, that's what's going on at the top of the screen there, and then I'm moving on to the next antenna. So I'm moving through my antenna array in some sequence, capturing these numbers. And these numbers get fed up the Bluetooth stack to the top, where you start doing your trigonometry calculations. You build matrices of numbers, you pass through them, you do some trig function on them, you end up with an angle you're happy with, and you use that to drive your application behavior. That's how this stuff works. Now back to here, carefully pressing that button, followed by this button. So, in our digging beneath the surface to find out how this all works, there's one thing I haven't told you, because life's never simple, right? So, you've probably heard the term channel as applied to radio and TV and stuff like this. Here's what a channel really is. A channel is a mechanism for dividing a potentially quite large range of radio frequencies into useful and usable bands. Bluetooth Low Energy divides the spectrum that it works in, this is 2.4 gigahertz, into 2 megahertz bands. So there's a lower limit and an upper limit of frequency for each channel. and if you're transmitting anywhere between those two limits, then you're using that channel. That's just the definition. If I'm between A and B, where B is 2 megahertz higher than A, then I'm using that channel, okay? However, let's go digital in an unusual step in this presentation. How do we represent the ones and zeros from our digital world? Well, within the channel that we're communicating on, if you imagine that center frequency in the middle between the upper and lower boundaries of that channel, if I want to transmit a 0, I subtract a special value from that center frequency. That gives me something which means 0. If I want to transmit a 1, I add that same value to that center frequency. And this special value is called the frequency deviation. And that's how I do my 1s and 0s when I'm communicating on a specific channel. I'm just changing the frequency that I'm using without falling outside the boundaries of that channel. Now, this gives us a problem with direction finding, because if the frequency is changing, that means the wavelength is changing, and hang on a moment, that means that my phase measurements are going to get awfully confusing, because it depends whether the signal that I'm sampling to measure the phase represents a 0 or a 1, and it's all too much. So, we don't do that. Direction finding signals, which is a term I used earlier on, which you all happily accepted. No one went, but what does that mean? You've let me get to this point, which is great. These are special Bluetooth packets that have something on the end of them called the constant tone extension. It's just a series of 1s, which makes it really great material for doing the IQ sampling, which lets me measure phase values, which lets me feed calculations from which direction is determined. It's a constant value, therefore a constant frequency, so I don't have to worry about wavelengths changing and all this kind of stuff. I hope this is geeky enough for you. There's some non-technical presentations out there as well, you know. So, that, my friends, is how it all works. And hopefully you can visualize all sorts of amazing things that will become possible with this. Still plenty of work for you guys to do, though. Now, depending on the kind of work you do, if you're involved in the firmware for devices, you're going to be working close to the coalface, you'll be working quite close to hardware. We're talking about embedded software engineering here. If you're more on the kind of application side, and we're talking maybe web applications or mobile applications, things like that, then you're going to be consuming this data that's coming up from the Bluetooth stack via an API of some sort and doing stuff with it. And you're still going to have to do a fair amount of thinking. I see this as falling into two levels. Solution level, where you're looking at system level stuff, and the application itself. So where the solution itself is concerned, you're going to be concerned with deploying direction finding beacons in a building. Where do I put them? How many do I have? What density do they need to have? How accurate do I need things to be? That's something for which methodologies will evolve, and probably there's going to be some iterative kind of on-site testing as part of that solution level step. Applications, all sorts of things you're still going to need to do. Receiving a signal, being able to identify its source and direction is great, but it gives you no real information. You still need to make that step into, well, what does that mean? It means they're pointing their phone at this specific painting. So all that kind of logic is still there for you to determine. And some other things as well. The behavior of sampling is very parameterized, and the Bluetooth stack lets you communicate with it to tell you what it is that you require of it. Our expectation, this is new stuff by the way, don't forget, is that APIs will make a lot of this very easy for you. Some of our profiles are going to get a refresh. Maybe some new ones are coming out quite soon. Not really allowed to tell you more details about that, but things will get easier, and some things that were previously not possible with Bluetooth will become possible. So one way of seeing the world and where this might take us is that given how phenomenally successful Generation 1 Bluetooth beacons have been, this makes all sorts of things possible. And oh, by the way, Bluetooth is really cheap as well. Business people like that, and of course, it's in everything, 10 million devices a day, so that kind of helps. So, assuming you're not all sat there thinking, oh, really want to go, please tell me you're not. Let me point you in the direction of some other stuff, should you like the idea of doing some reading. We've got tons of stuff to read. First and foremost, there is the core specification itself. So we have specifications coming out of our ears. The core spec defines Bluetooth. How it works, what the layers of the stack are, what they all do, how they talk to each other up and down the stack, all that good stuff. You're a stack implementer, that's your Bible. It is 3,000 pages long. I'm not suggesting you go home and read all of it right now, but you will find everything to do with this topic in there somewhere. If you want an easier read though, we have a number of papers on our website. What's our website, I hear you say? It is, of course, bluetooth.com. Write that down. Quite easy to remember, hopefully. So bluetooth.com, homepage, click on resources, you'll find all sorts of stuff there. There's like a filtering thing on the left-hand side. I think papers is what you want. The three that I'm kind of pulling out for you to look at are these. We've got the Bluetooth direction finding technical overview paper, which I did in fact write, so it's okay, it's what we just talked about, but in more depth and with some pretty pictures. There's a less technical paper, which is the one in the middle, enhancing Bluetooth location services with direction finding, so if you're really short of time, my thing's probably only, 20 pages at the most or something like that. And there's something from one of our members, so Bluetooth SIG is a membership organisation. Companies that make Bluetooth products that are kind of backing the technology join the Bluetooth SIG. Some of them participate in the specification work, and that's a company called Silicon Labs, who've written their own paper on the angle of arrival, angle of departure methods, and how they all work. So, thank you very much for listening. Really appreciate you coming. At one point, there was only 2 people in the room, and I did wonder, so thank you again. Do we have any questions? And by the way, again, if you didn't get a sticker, just make sure, take several. They make the ideal Christmas present for people you don't really like that much. It's what my family are all getting. Not that I don't like them. Delete that bit.
Well, thank you very much. I was wondering, do we require new hardware, or it is just about upgrading our firmware to the new specification?
It depends which end of the equation you are. Obviously, if you're at the end of the equation where an antenna array is required, then new hardware will certainly be needed there. Bluetooth kind of breaks its architecture, the architecture of the stack, into 2 major building blocks. There's the host, which is the stuff at the top, and that can take several different forms, and the controller at the bottom, which is where the really hardcore stuff happens. And all of the changes relating to direction finding are down there. So it depends whether for your device type that's upgradable as, let's say, an OS upgrade. So for something like a Linux computer, then it would be. It'll just be a software upgrade. For other things, that might not be possible. So it kind of depends what the device is. You're going to have to watch out for things that say that they support Bluetooth 5.1, basically, I think. But again, it depends who you work for and what kind of work that you do. If you're in the device kind of product manufacturing business and you're an embedded software engineer, then you are close to that world and you'll know the answer to that question, I'd say.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Any other questions? Oh, there's one down here. Excellent. So we're making our moderator or our host work very hard by alternating the questions from the very back of the room to the front. This is fun. I like this. You people, evil.
So my question is that, of course, in the end where you need an array of receivers, antennas, does that affect the energy efficiency of the Bluetooth?
I suppose I don't really have any data on this, but I would imagine that it could well do. Direction finding is going to be relatively computationally intensive, but you're not likely to be doing it continuously. So it's probably going to vary depending on the application and exactly how you're doing it. The direction finding signals that you're transmitting are very small, and you're operating at kind of a magnitude of hundreds of microseconds, so it's very, very, very brief. Things like beacons installed in buildings are likely to be powered by the grid, mains power, as you say in the UK. So energy efficiency tends to have 2 sides to it. One is, will my battery last long enough? And again, so in that scenario, that's not an issue. And the other one is cost. Costs are very low for these things anyway, so I don't think that's a problem there. Almost certainly there is a cost to be paid. No such thing as a free lunch, right? You didn't get a free lunch just now, if that's what you're thinking. You really didn't. So, reasonable answer. Yeah, probably, but it kind of depends exactly what's going on. Yeah. Anyone else? Oh, in the middle now. It's almost like you planned it. Very impressive.
Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for the presentation. I would like to know your opinion about the technology impact, so the impact of the technology in surveillance, in spying or whatever. We can use the technology for spy with more accuracy.
Oh, crikey. How do I answer that question? Obviously, with great power comes great responsibility, I suppose. We don't really have any control over what people use Bluetooth communications for any more than people who make TCP/IP stacks and Ethernet cards do. Clearly, we have an opportunity here to track devices with greater accuracy. Could that be used for evil as well as good?
Okay.
Don't know how to answer that question, really. Perhaps I should segue into some comments about the good things about Bluetooth. Are you aware of the privacy feature in Bluetooth? Was that a no that I heard? I think it was a no, so let me tell you about that then, by way of balancing up this bleak scenario that has just been suggested. And first of all, by the way, let's just go back a second here and get your brain properly in gear. Bluetooth is a passive piece of software on hardware in a computer. On its own, it does nothing. So don't forget operating systems, permission systems, applications and their behaviors and what they can and can't do on devices. These are all a really important part of that question that you just asked. Okay, so I don't know if it's new in Android. Is it Android 10 that's just come out, that I've just been upgraded to? Whatever the latest Android is, but I noticed I was asked whether I was happy that the Uber application was tracking my location whilst running in background. I didn't even know it was running in background. So being able to say with more granularity whether I was happy for it to know my location and restrict it only to when the app was in foreground, that was, well, one, terrifying, because I had no idea it was doing that, but two, a good step forward. But it just shows where a lot of these issues lie. It's not in the communications technology any more than an Ethernet cable is responsible for all of your security. It's a bit more of a complicated question than that. But let me segue into Bluetooth privacy. So one of the things that can be done with any communicating technology potentially is track movements of people through the devices that they have. This is true of Wi-Fi and can be true of Bluetooth, but doesn't have to be depending on what the manufacturer stroke application developer does. Because we provide you with a security toolbox, you, the software development community, you have to figure out which of those capabilities you want to use to address your security requirements. We can't guess what your requirements might be, so we try and make sure you've got all the things that you might need to be able to address any security requirements that might come up. And one of them is called resolvable private addresses. So your device is going to communicate, maybe it's advertising, which is a periodic broadcasting thing. There's a unique identifier in there. That could be used to track you, unless you're using resolvable private addresses, because it's obfuscated and encrypted, and it rotates, it changes every 10, 15 minutes and so on. To an assailant monitoring communications, it looks like a series of different devices. They have no idea it's actually the same device. But devices I've paired with, who's heard of Bluetooth pairing? Please, everyone's heard of Bluetooth pairing, right? Devices I've paired with, I have a trusted relationship with, and I've actually exchanged a series of security keys during that. Pairing is actually a security procedure. Those devices can take that encrypted, disguised private address and actually revert it to the real internal address. So my trusted devices know it's me, know it's that other device. Any miscellaneous device out there can't tell that it's you that's walking this particular route every day to work or something. So we do our bit to try and safeguard the privacy of people with respect to tracking location, but it's a bigger question than just communication.
Thanks.
Long answer, good question though, thank you, you made me think. Anyone else?
Hi, it's a double question. Is it mandatory to be 5.1 compliant to have the array of antennas? And in that case, is it a fixed number?
Let me make sure I understood the question. I think you're asking me, is it mandatory to be 5.1 compliant to use multiple antenna?
Yeah.
Prior to 5.1, there was nothing in the specification that deals with or requires multiple antenna. That doesn't necessarily mean that you can't have them, but we're into sort of uncharted territory where I'd have to do some thinking and looking at rules and specs to give you a good answer. If you want to use the direction finding capability that I've just described, with angle of arrival or angle of departure, with one of the two devices having an antenna array, then yes, you have to be 5.1 compliant.
Yeah, but this means that maybe could be a device that could said that he is the device is 5.1 compliant but has no those capabilities.
Sorry, could you repeat that, please?
Yeah, this means that maybe a manufacturer could give or could sell a device that says that is 5.1 compliant but has not finding capabilities. They do not have them.
Okay, I'm not sure I'm following the question. Sorry.
Could a manufacturer said that they have a 5.1 device compliant that
Right.
has no some of the capabilities, meaning
Okay.
finding objects or so on?
So maybe there are two halves to this question. One is kind of what can I assume is true if someone says that their device is 5.1 compliant? And that's a good question because for many of the specification releases, some of the new features may be optional. So you may well be, version n.x compliant, but that doesn't necessarily tell you what features the device has. So I mentioned 5.0 earlier on, and it had three big ticket changes, 2 megabits per second communication, 4 times the range through something called a coded PHY, and some other stuff. They're actually all optional. Okay, so you can be 5.0 compliant and not actually have any of those new features that I've just mentioned. So for that one, you have to look at the product details. You have to look at the product spec and go, oh yeah, it's got what I need. You can't just look at the box and go, oh, it says 5.1, therefore it must have this capability. So that's the first half of what I hope answers your question. The other thing is to be aware, excuse me, is that one of our roles as a standards organisation is to operate a compliance program. We call it qualification. Manufacturers have to put their devices through a series of tests driven by a tool that we provide. They say, yeah, we're compliant with this, 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 and this, and we check that because our tool runs a series of automated tests against the remote device over a connection or whatever, and produces a report which is checked. So there is a managed compliance program which is all about this striving for maximum interoperability between devices from different manufacturers. And if anyone breaks the rules there, someone just prints it on the box, we have a compliance team that has a little conversation with them, okay? Because this interoperability and quality thing's really important. It's why there are 10 million a day, because it's been fairly successful. We're always trying to get better at achieving the best possible experience for customers, for users of Bluetooth, but it's pretty good, I would say. Does that answer your question okay?
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Very much.
Cool. Yes, sir. Run.
So you were mentioning all the time manufacturers. That means that Bluetooth as a company doesn't sell any device, it just
Correct.
provides a specification?
Completely correct. Yeah, we don't sell things, we don't make things. We have some software tools that help customers, manufacturers, they're not our customers because they don't buy anything from us, members is a better term, progress through the process of contributing to specifications as a workflow tool for specification work that we do with our member companies. And there's a tool I just mentioned which is all about testing and proving that you meet the requirements of the specification. But no, we don't make stuff at all. Our members do. 35,000 companies that have all said, yeah, Bluetooth is the technology that we're backing. So yeah, that's how that works.
But I guess it's not that any manufacturer can go to your page and just implement Bluetooth. I guess they have to go through the company, right? So they have to license it or something, right?
Not exactly. It's not really my area of expertise here, but if you're going to use Bluetooth in a device, yes, you need to be a member of the Bluetooth Special Interest Group. Membership is free or costs money depending on what you want to do. So there's a level where you pay some money and then you can get on the inside and you work on the specifications. You bring your expertise, you become part of the team that changes Bluetooth and brings new capabilities to it. So it's quite a big team behind the direction finding stuff and mesh and all those things. Basic membership though is free, and that gives you slightly earlier access to specifications before they're released, but only slightly earlier. If you pay some money, you're involved right from the start if you want to be. Massive commercial advantage, of course, because you're the day the spec's released, you've probably got your product ready because you've been working on it. Products themselves, though, there is a fee associated with. You have to do something called listing. You have to say, I've got a Bluetooth product, here are my test results, it's been qualified, and there is a registration fee there. And all of this is about, we're a not-for-profit organisation, we're not trying to make money out of people. This is about funding the operation of the standards organisation that's been successful enough to achieve the interoperability that gives rise to this enormous market with 10 million devices every day. That's the thinking behind it. When Bluetooth was invented 20-something years ago, the key movers behind it, Ericsson, Intel, people like that, could have said, let's keep this to ourselves. But they realized that having a smaller slice of a truly enormous market where this technology was everywhere because it just worked on everything was a far more sensible thing to do and better from a business point of view than making it proprietary and closed and private and a small market, because other companies, of course, would then invent their own similar thing and they'd all be competing, and people using devices would get frustrated because they'd buy this device and it wouldn't work with this device. So that's what happened, but of course it takes people. We're not very big, we're less than 100 people, but hey, I need paying, right? I'm not just here to distribute stickers. So that's what the funding side of things is for, is to fund the operation of a standards organisation. That's it. I think all members, I think the agreement makes you a kind of part owner of the IPR or something like this. But again, we're kind of drifting beyond my remit and expertise now. So it's like a shared IPR license, I think.
Thank you.
No problem.
Well, thank you for coming. Don't forget to vote before leaving. And yeah.
Yeah, thank you again. Thank you, guys. Much appreciate it.